We're here today with Jason Robbins, who is the CEO, co-founder of DraftKings. And I want to turn to you, Jason, and ask you, where did this come from? I mean, you were known as this statistical whiz kid who memorized every sports statistic. Is this something that really came from a childhood passion that you just developed? I mean, how do you connect the dots?
Well, I think if you look way back, yes. I always had a passion for stats. I really, when I found fantasy sports, it was love at first sight. But I also had a passion for entrepreneurship. And that developed a little bit later. And I think that, as much as the passion for the subject matter, is what drove me. Actually, in some ways, ended up being a coincidence that it was a subject that I loved. I mean, I think in some ways it's a benefit. It can also be a negative, because sometimes you tend to think you're the customer and just look at it through one lens. I was determined to be an entrepreneur, and I was lucky that it was in an area that I personally find very enjoyable as well.
So you're saying that for you it's somewhat serendipitous, or almost as likely that you could have been an entrepreneur in another field?
If there were an idea that were a good one that had nothing to do with anything I was interested in, and I felt that it was something that I had the right skill set to pursue, I would have. And you know, the company I was at before, Vistaprint, I learned a lot about internet-based marketing, website and mobile navigation, testing. The company I was at before that, Capital One, I learned about analytics. I learned about marketing, about sales, many different things. Neither of those subjects were fascinating to me, credit cards and online printing. But I found the companies to be incredibly just thrilling places to be. There were just so many smart people there. The businesses had these incredible niches that they had carved out, and Capital One, of course, then expanded upon that, and really just learned so much from being there, and enjoyed the people around me. So for me, it's always been about the people, and if it's subject matter that I enjoy as well, then that makes it all the better.
But take a moment and just tell us the core of your business. What you do, what's the benefit of your product and your business?
So our business is a fantasy sports company, and what that means is we host games that people play against each other. You come onto our website or mobile app, and the idea is you are a fantasy general manager. You get to be the general manager of your own team for a day, and you can pick real-world athletes. Doesn't have to be people that you might like. It can be just people that you think will do well, and you pick them from a mishmash of different teams. So you're kind of assembling this fantasy team that's not real, but you've created as the general manager. And then you enter that team into competitions against other people who've done the same thing. And the way it works is the points, the fantasy points, which ultimately determine who wins or loses, are based on the statistics. So the idea is it's kind of simulating, if you had really been the general manager and picked that team, would you have done a better job than the people that you were up against? The benefit is, I think, that it allows people to engage in sports in a way that just goes beyond the passive experience they're used to. If you look at really why most people follow sports, there's something about it, and it varies for people exactly what the trigger point is, but there's something about it that makes them feel personally connected. For a lot of people, that comes from a hometown team. Why do we care about our hometown team? Just because we're from there and we feel that connection. Not because we have any vested stake in how they do, or because we know people on the team, usually anyway, maybe you do. But for most people, that's not the case. It's that connection that you feel. And I think fantasy sports brings people that much closer. It makes it so that you feel like you're participating, you're a part of it. You get to exercise that fantasy of actually being the person who's directing traffic out on the field and deciding who gets to go and play in different positions. And that's something that most of us have only dreamed about, and as a sports fan, it doesn't get any better than that. And then the practical benefit it provides for the sports leagues and for the teams and the media companies is that it does drive deeper engagement in the content. So all of a sudden, maybe somebody that was just interested in their hometown team before wants to pay attention to every team and every player across the whole league. Games that are blowouts, that are in the fourth quarter and are 30-point leads, and there's no hope of anyone coming back, there's still fantasy points being accumulated, and maybe you're still in a tight matchup in your fantasy contest, so you're watching that all the way through. Games between teams with terrible records, I mean, the list goes on and on. Every play, every moment becomes exciting. And then there's this also just whole alternate content universe that gets built up around it. People do research, they look at who's starting, whose coach is going to more likely favor this player or that one, what are the injuries. It's just such an incredible, enormous demand for content that gets created. And what I love about the business is it's truly a business where as we grow and as we drive more engagement and a better product for consumers, we're also growing our partners' businesses, the sports leagues, the teams, the media companies. You don't get a lot of opportunities like that, and that just enables all these creative and innovative partnerships.
You started with two co-founders.
Yes.
We talk about vision in our leadership class. How is it to derive a vision with two other people that are equal partners to you in the business? How does that work?
It's a great question, and it's something that really created struggles for us early on. One of my co-founders, Matt, was actually the one that came up with this initial idea, and he and I had a very similar, but in some cases pretty different, vision for years out what it would look like. And we spent a good deal of time arguing about it. I remember we had my current chief marketing officer start off as an advisor for us, and she likes to reference the therapy session we had on her couch where we were, pretty much at each other's throat over what the 5-year vision was. And what happened was we all kind of looked at each other and said, what are we arguing about? If we don't get this thing off the ground, who cares? And I always reference this comment to my other co-founder, Paul, said this, and it just really stuck with me and I think helped me focus in the right places. He said, look, you may be thinking we're going to California, we're in Boston, that's where we're based. He goes, you may be thinking we're going to California, Matt may be thinking we're going to Oregon, but we still got to get on I-90 West and start driving. So why don't we do that first and focus on what we can agree with? And it just stuck with me, and I said, what are we doing arguing about this? There's going to be so many twists and turns by the time we even need to worry about that. Let's focus on getting traction. Let's focus on getting off the ground. As long as what we're doing isn't taking us in a direction that I think conflicts with my long-term vision, then it's just not as important in those early stages. Once you start to fill out employees around you and you start to have something take shape, then it's much more important to articulate the vision. But what I realized early on that I didn't know, and it's a lesson learned for me, is actually sometimes that can create more conflict and argument than do good. If you're on the same page generally about where you need to go next with that initial team, and really the sole objective in any build it from scratch startup is just to get it off the ground and get traction, then that's what you should focus on.
In your business, experimentation is part of your mantra. You're constantly experimenting. Therefore, you must have failure. How do you manage experimentation as part of your culture and then cope with failure? How does that work?
Well, you encourage it. So first, you have to build systems that allow for it. If it's difficult to do experimentation, then people won't do it. They're going to only do things if it's really easy. So that's first and foremost important. You got to make it so that it's very simple. So people have no excuse when you say, why didn't you test this thing? You could have done it easily. You just chose not to do it. Secondly, I think it's in the people you hire. If you hire people that are analytically minded, that like to test things, that aren't afraid to take risks, I think that that's also as important as anything you can do as a manager to encourage it. And then third is you reinforce the behaviors that you want in the right way. So simply put, you don't punish people for taking calculated risks and trying things and testing things. You don't punish people because something that they tried didn't work. Otherwise, they're never going to try something that may not work, and that's not what you want. And you actually, in some cases, have to positively reinforce that. You have to say, you know what, I'm going to actually reward you even though this didn't work. You did a great job setting it up, and we figured it out, and we gained an insight from it, and that's actually very useful and valuable to the company.
How have you changed as you've evolved from this founder, probably on somebody's couch, mentality to really running a huge business now in terms of investment scale, number of users? How have you changed as a leader, as a manager? What have you learned?
I think the most important thing, and it's really more kind of in day-to-day what I do than I've changed in philosophy, the most important thing is to surround yourself with good people. And I think that from day one that's been a focus. And the way that that's caused me to change is as much as it was fun for me, and this is where it can be dangerous to work on a product that you're personally passionate about, much as it was fun for me to get into the weeds on certain product questions or marketing or analytics or even tech stuff, which I should not be doing, it's not really the best way for me to help the company. The best way for me to help the company is to play the role that I should be playing. And I think that when you surround yourself with good people, it makes it a lot easier to let go. So that was a pretty consistent philosophy, and I think has allowed me to evolve and change without it seeming painful. It's felt quite natural, and it hasn't been painful for me to let go of stuff, but the only reason is because I trust with my life the people that we've put in charge to make decisions in these areas, and all the way down to every member of the company. The talent bar, the threshold there is just so amazing. So, you know.
And you had to actually learn to pull back from every operational decision and action that you took initially.
Yeah, it was more of a natural process really than feeling like I had to learn because of the talent around us and because of the faith I had in them. But yes, I had to do that in practice. And you know, for me also, there were certain events. Everything moved so quickly. My business went, you know, into this rapid growth mode, and then we had so many curveballs thrown at us that also, in some ways, that made it easier. I just had to kind of drop other stuff and focus. And when I finally looked back up and said, well, where is product, where is this? I was amazed at what progress had been made, and makes it a lot easier when you do have more mental energy and time to re-engage, to trust people if by necessity you had to do it and then they rose to the occasion.
Thanks so much, Jason, for being here.
Thank you for having me.